Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Charity Rouse. I am the Director of Local History for the Spartanburg County Public Library System in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and we are delighted to have people joining me live here in our meeting room and also online via Zoom. We are recording this for the Spartanburg County Public Library Zoom YouTube channel, and that will be posted usually by the end of the week. So tonight's topic is coroner's records. And I've had a couple people ask me, coroner's records? Why are those? Why do we need to look at those? Well, that's why I put this program together. And we're going to see a little bit about how these are important and why they can be very helpful in your research. So broadly, if the person you're researching died under certain circumstances, the coroner may have needed to participate in the certification or an investigation of the death. Additionally, your relative or the person you're researching may have participated in a coroner's jury. These records can shed light on how and why someone died. And like any other local record, they can verify location and time frame when your person was in a particular area. So if you know your person was in the Campobello area of Spartanburg County and they served on a coroner's jury, you know that they lived within 10 miles of the point of where that body was discovered. And so that can really help you pinpoint where they are in the county. Now, the coroner could be from anywhere in the county doing the investigation, and the recorder or scribe, again, could be a court official, but the jurors, at least for most of the time period, had to live within 10 miles of the body that they were investigating. So the body that was being investigated. That was the right way to phrase that. I love knowing this is recorded. Yeah. What exactly does a coroner do? Well, this is straight from our Spartanburg County Coroners website at spartanburgcoroner.org. And their mission is to provide the citizens of our county the best death investigation available in order to render a cause and manner of death an unattended or suspicious death situation. And they are a highly trained group of individuals, and at least these days, historically, maybe not as much, but they are committed to helping answer questions. So in the services, they are mandated by law to certify death, investigate death when it happens in situations where it is outside of a hospital and then also unattended. So if there is a car accident and someone dies from that, there are certain things that within a certain number of hours of a surgical procedure or some other specific situations outlined in the law, and you can read the law, I've got it linked on your handout, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. There are certain times when the coroner has to at least ask questions. Now, sometimes it's as simple as a phone call to a hospice nurse or to an official at a nursing facility, those types of things, or just by phone with the EMS people at the site, or the emergency room, or various things. But then there are the other situations where if someone dies in a hotel room, so somebody has to do an investigation and figure out who is this person and make sure that we know why they died. Also, any person under the age of 18 who dies, their death has to be investigated by the coroner. That is state law. That is state law here in South Carolina. I know it was state law in Kansas. Your state may vary, but that one is probably one of the situations where every state the coroner is required to be involved in the death certification process. They also are the county office that gives cremation permits. So whether or not it was a suspicious death, they work with funeral homes on making sure that cremations can happen, because there is now a 24-hour waiting period for you decide that your loved one remains need to be cremated. You have 24 hours to change your mind before they can proceed with the cremation. So there are a few more things on this slide, and you can read them on the handout and on your computer if you go to the coroner's website. So they perform independent investigations into violent, suspicious deaths, deaths that occur outside of hospitals, and deaths that occur suddenly or unexpectedly. They notify families when an unexpected death occurs, such as in a traffic fatality or homicide. So they are the arm of law enforcement that does that notification. They make positive legal identification of individuals who have died. They create reports related to deaths investigated by the coroner's office, and those reports are what we're really going to be looking at tonight. They issue burial transit permits for individuals who have died outside of the hospital so they can be transported to the funeral home. And they do provide autopsy and coroner's reports to agencies and next of kin. So they are the ones in charge of doing autopsies. They do make the final determination as to the manner of death in consultation with any physicians who are treating the patient. And some other things related to what the probate court orders them to do. And they do maintain the county coroner's book of inquisitions. Well, some of the records that we are going to be looking at tonight are loose papers, which predate the book of inquisitions. And we already talked about the cremation permits, but even though they consult in death certificates, they do not issue death certificates. Death certificates are issued by the Department of Health and Environmental Control in South Carolina. So, I mean, they have a long list of what they do. One thing that they do not, and that is repeated many times on their website. So apparently they get a lot of questions about that. So, South Carolina Code, if you want to read a lot of legalese and know all of the specific things, I have read through this. I can't regurgitate it all, but I have read it. It is South Carolina Code, Title 17, Criminal Prosecution, Chapter 7, Autopsies and Inquest on the Dead. And it outlines the roles and responsibilities. It outlines what a coroner has to be qualified for. And lots of different things are outlined in this. It tells you exactly who legally has to have the coroner investigate. Now, if a family wants the coroner to investigate, I think they can request that. But it's just one of those situations. There are some legal places where they have to. But the core responsibility is investigating unattended or suspicious deaths. So, who can become a coroner? Well, in the early years, it was any male who was a legal, who was eligible to vote. And it was similar to that of a judge, no formal requirements for a medical or law enforcement background originally. That changed over time, and you would have to check all of the various statutes between then and now to know when all of these things changed. But the coroner is an elected official these days. And in South Carolina, that person does have to have certain training, degrees, and/or experience to run the office. So again, I'm talking South Carolina specific because that's where I am based, and that's the records we'll be looking at. Your state or country may have different requirements on that local level. The South Carolina Coroners Association website at sccoroners.com has a lot of these requirements distilled out into a long list. And it is also from the South Carolina Code that I mentioned on the last screen, section 17-5-130. So it tells you all sorts of things. And again, this will vary depending on your location, so do double check, because Kansas has different requirements for who can be coroner. And if they don't have a medical background, then they have to have a paid medical examiner who does have those qualifications. And in Kansas, that gets interesting with the very small counties that have no budget. So it just depends. So coroner's juries are still on the books here in South Carolina. I could not find anything that told me how often they have been convened in the last however long, since we've actually had paid medical examiners and staff in our coroner's office that do the investigations, that they are law enforcement and medical staff. Historically, it was anyone over the age of 14 if they were really having to dig in a rural area. 21 is the more reasonable and more recognized number, because typically you needed to be on the list of voters, but not always, because population density in parts of the county was not as high at times. And so they could call anyone. They had to call between 10 and 14 people who lived in that 10-mile radius. And you could have males, females, free persons, or enslaved persons as witnesses and as jury members. Again, sometimes population was sparse enough that you were going for an able-bodied person who had a reasonable set of eyes in their head. I mean, and again, historically, you needed to live within that 10 miles of the site of the body that the body was found. Currently, you can be called if you are on your county's list of active potential jurors. So if you are a registered voter and qualified to be a juror in any other situation in Spartanburg County, then you could be called for a coroner's jury. Now, these are usually called much more quickly than other juries, because within 24 to 48 hours is as long as you want that investigation to be pending. And so they really did try to get these called quickly and convened quickly so that they could interview everybody in a timely manner. So where can you find the documents? Well, the Kennedy Room has 2 rolls of microfilm produced by the South Carolina Department of Archives and History, and those cover coroners' inquisitions for Spartanburg County from 1803 to 1878, and the second roll from 1879 to 1889. And then there's a great website called csidixie.org, and it is run by eHistory at the University of Georgia. And it includes coroner's records for 10 South Carolina counties currently, and those are Anderson, Chesterfield, Edgefield, Fairfield, Greenville, Horry, Kershaw, Lawrence, Spartanburg, and Union. And so and Spartanburg was one of the original 3 counties that they started with, so our stuff has been up there a while. But it's a great website, and we will talk about both of these resources in the next few minutes. So, on those rolls of microfilm, I chose to pull the first case we have record for in 1803 and the last case we have record for in 1889. So there are some differences between the two. And I do have a summary at the end of each section, so don't feel like you need to read all of the handwriting. But one of the things I discovered when I put that roll of microfilm on our microfilm reader is before the official stuff in the preface stuff where they're testing the camera and they're certifying who did the role, who did the filming, and that kind of thing. There was this wonderful list that is shown on your screen that starts with frame number 1 for Roland Hutchison. And it says page number. Well, they got creative because there aren't page numbers. These are loose packets of papers. And so it was 3 January 1803. And then frame number 13 was the next case for Benjamin Farmer, and on down. And there are multiple pages of this at the beginning. So it's like an index at the beginning of the roll, even though nothing told us that there was an index of any sort on this particular roll. We just had a meticulous, Kay Barton has my eternal thanks, because Kay Barton made sure we had this list. Now you will notice that some of these people have first and last names. Down here we have Booker and Negro Man at frame number 145. At the very bottom, we have at 175, we have Adam, a slave of the estate of Jane Bobo in 1828. So, any unattended death. It did not matter your state and society. Now, we presume that all of them got recorded. We trust that the officials did what they were supposed to. But this is showing us, at least in most cases, they did. And this is kind of preface pages. So these would be those Roman numeral pages before you get to page 1 of the novel. So you get a little extra stuff. And 2013 is when these were filmed. So they were not filmed that long ago. So at the beginning of each case, you get a Spartanburg County Coroner's Inquisition, name of the decedent, and the date of the case. And then you start getting pages of documentation. And you get, this is the verdict, which was not the first thing, but it's the first thing that was filmed in this file. And it lists out the jury members, and it has their signatures at the bottom, or their marks with the signature written out by the scribe. In all of these cases, you also get the back of the page is filmed, because the back of the page, this shows you where it was folded into 4 to be put into an envelope that would have been, what, about 9 inches wide and 5 inches tall, something like that, slightly larger than our current letter size envelope, but not much bigger. It was not a big legal manila envelope. Also included are witness interviews, the recording of that. You can see handwriting changes on frame 4, and I have included the frame numbers on most of these images. I forgot to on the first couple, and then I was like, oh, if I'm talking about frame numbers, we need to know where to find the frame number on the microfilm. So it's usually above or below the image, and each image gets a frame number, because it's each photograph is a frame. And here I've skipped some of the back pages. Actually, I put them to the side there. And the back on the spine, it always says what is included, what case it is, and often the date of the case, so that if a piece of paper gets separated from the rest of that loose paper file, that it can be gotten back to it. And then the last 2 pages talk about the witness statements, and then on frame 10, we have the witnesses being, it's a recording of the summons, the warrant that they are to show up at the trial. to testify at the trial of the accused murderer in this case. Whether it was accidental or not, we would have to go to those court files to find out. But this tells us that there was a court date, and it tells us when to start looking for that. At the end of each of the files, we have a wonderful little end of file. And then the next person gets their little header, and then we go through the next case. So when you're scanning through this, it can be relatively easy to figure out what frame numbers you're headed to, or at least case by case, what the deal is. So I told you I would do a summary of all of that handwritten stuff. The coroner's inquisition for Roland Hutchison, deceased, was on the 3rd of January, 1803. It was at the house of William Davis in the district of Spartanburg, and Alexander Evans was the coroner. Members of the jury, and these are my transcriptions of some pretty bad handwriting, so I do not guarantee that I got everyone spelled correctly, and my apologies to the families if I did not. Benjamin McMicken, Howard Bailey, Lemuel Lofton, James Runnels, David McClanahan, William McClanahan, John Robnett, Daniel Evans, John McDaniel, Ezekiel Farmer, James Wilson, Thomas Booker, James Powell, and Thaddeus Owen. The two witnesses were Isaac Wood and Daniel Daly, and they said that William Davis, whose house the deceased body was discovered, fought about liquor, and that the fight was lengthy, and each of them went away and grabbed something to come back and strike at the other. And so, both of them were in on it, and, when alcohol is involved, and it didn't say they were drinking, it was just over alcohol. So one can presume they were under some influence in the process of this. And and I mentioned the summons and bonds of the witnesses to testify in the court trial on the 4th Monday in March, presumably of that same year. I could not read that date, but January to March, court was probably quarterly in those days. So the death was sometime on the 1st of January, 1803, and William Davis broke the skull of Roland Hutchison with a large wooden shovel. So it did not say they did an autopsy. In 1803, they could have. It was not as common as current, just simply because that science has improved immensely over the last 2 centuries. But we at least know there was an altercation at the home of William Davis, and he and Roland Hutchison got into it and were hitting each other with stuff, including a large wooden shovel. Like many genealogy records, it's not necessarily happy bedtime reading. But hey, you have answers. You know what the cause of death was, if that was your ancestor, or you wanted to know why William Davis ended up wherever he ended up. As I said, I didn't do the research to continue to research the case, but you can. This is one step in the documentary evidence of this situation. So our second case is Margaret Brannan. And again, the same wonderful microfilmer did a list for us for these records. And it is case starting on 1295, and it is 15 December 1889. And even with our fancy microfilm machines, I didn't get really good images of this. CSI Dixie may have actually filmed from the originals rather than the microfilm because their image is better. And I could not get a good screenshot of that. So hopefully in a minute, I'll be able to go over to the CSI Dixie website and show it to you there. But again, we have the verdict, we have the naming of the jury, we have their signatures, and then we have the testimony of some witnesses who happen to be the son and the daughter of the woman, of Margaret, as well as her employer. She picked cotton, and the employer thought that she and her daughter were arguing about something. Her daughter was also picking cotton that week, but he didn't see anything wrong with her. Now, nothing in here in 1889 tells me whether Margaret was white or black. So, but there was a differential between the owner of the farm and the workers, and not every owner particularly cared about the people doing the physical labor to pick the cotton. So some of his testimony may have been a little more callous than one might wish, and he was, quite frankly, probably making some stuff up, but I don't know. The son had been out working elsewhere and came home and said, "No, mom was fine then." And the daughter also said, you know, she went out and picked cotton and she came home. So the coroner's jury was on the 15th of December, 1889. She died on the 14th. Presumably overnight, from what I could read in all of the bad microfilming of fading handwriting. And at Alice Taylor's place in Spartanburg County, the family was living together in a house, so I'm assuming it was a house on a property, and then they had been, Alice Taylor was not the person who they had been picking cotton for. So it may have been a situation where, you know, they were moving around to different fields to pick the cotton as the cotton was ready. J.M. James was the coroner. The jurors, and this list was really hard to get anything out of, but I think I got it. Thomas Staggs, M.A. Green was the foreman. B.F. Staggs, J.W. Ferris or Dar. Two lists and two very different names, but that was the only name that it could have been that same person. M.G. Golightly, J.C. Addy, Ellis Nesbitt, Daniel Smith, York Tinsley, George McJunkin, Samuel P. Young, and T.L. Dobbins. And then the cause of death that they all came up with was that it was either heart failure or affliction of the brain. So I, as a modern person, would read that and say, well, she either had a heart attack or a stroke. In her sleep, couldn't wake her up the next morning. That's my read on it. Somebody else might be able to go to the records and read it through and might come up with a different thing, but nothing that the one testimony of the employer said had anything to do with either of those two conditions. So, you know, they were interviewing the last people who had seen her alive, and they got different stories. The two children's stories do, in large part, mesh. And the employer hadn't seen her for a day or two, so who knows? Sidney Wilson was the employer, Jack Brannon was the son, and Mary Brannon was the daughter. So it's just kind of interesting to see who is involved. And again, if you are the descendant of one of these jurors, you now know a part of the county where that was, if you can identify where Alice Taylor's place is in Spartanburg County. So, CSI Dixie. Again, it covers currently 10 counties in South Carolina, and it is accessible to researchers anywhere at csidixie.org, and it is divided into sections with biblical book names. And I am going to see if I can switch over and have my screen share the actual website. And okay, where did that website go? That website, that went behind a treat. So let's see. So far, I have not gotten to the right place to get the screen shared. I'm working on it.
Do you need any help on my end?
I need to get Zoom to actually allow me to get to the screen share thing. Let's see. So Zoom meeting, there it is. Okay. Let's see, share. Okay. Now, okay, Cheryl, can you see the CSI Dixie site?
We can see it.
Okay, because what I need
I'm
now,
sorry, I didn't unmute myself and I was just talking,
Okay.
but yes, I can see it.
okay, because I'm trying to get it up for the people in the room with me. And if it doesn't work,
If I can see it, shouldn't everybody be able to see it?
yeah, well, the people in the room can still only see my presentation. So I might
Oh.
have to turn off my presentation. Okay, now they can see what I can see, and let's see if I pull this up. Okay, Cheryl, can you still see CSI Dixie?
No.
Okay, let me get to, see, I knew it wasn't going to be as simple as it was when I practiced it. Okay, share screen and share that screen and share.
Okay, now I can.
Okay. Unfortunately, you guys can now see some of the Zoom controls, but most of them should go away a little bit in a little bit. Okay. So on CSI Dixie, they have Genesis, which talks about the origins of CSI Dixie and why they created this as a research site, talks a little bit about the origins of the coroner's office and who their team is, which are mostly grad students and researchers at the University of Georgia. On numbers, you get the count of the dead, the inquest visualizations, and the mortality census. So the count of the dead, they talk a little bit about causes of death by decade, which is kind of a fun little graph. Homicides apparently peaked and declined and peaked and declined, and natural causes went way up. So it just depends. Accidents over the early 1800s declined in the 1850s. So different things like that. And they go on with the South Carolina data. They do have some data for some other states. And then they talk about parts of the inquest. And then they do talk about slaves in these records as well. So there's a lot of good reading that you could do. And again, they compared South Carolina ones in their sample to Nottingham and Virginia, I believe, is where that is, but in some other states. So different numbers of counties. And then the counties that are included in this so far, and they have a full list of all of the South Carolina counties, how many records are extant, and whether they have been microfilmed or not. Barnwell, for instance, has an inquisition book, which is only an index, so you don't get the case records, and they may not have survived. The records are located in large part at the South Carolina Department of Archives and History. And it depends on the location, whether it is part of the General Sessions records or whether they have a specific inquisition book, or in Marlboro, they do have written books of the coroner. So it never hurts to ask someone who works with the records of the county that you're looking at to see if they know more about what the resource is on that local level. And for Spartanburg, we know that they did have 1803 to 1908 records. Unfortunately for us, we only have up to 1889. The coroner's office does have the more modern records. The 2 microfilm reels do not go up through 1909. The other thing is that could be a typo on their part, but because they say they've all been done, but their last case is the same as our last case. The acts, you can search on CSI Dixie by cause of death. And they, I mean, these are college grad students doing research for their masters and doctorates. So of course, they're going to have a lot of context and research that you can do. And they talk about some of the more noticeable cases in each of the categories. They have a section on who the coroners are, and then who the juries are. I'm trying not to move it too fast to let it populate a little bit, but let it also see. And this does talk year by year, statute revision by statute revision for South Carolina as to what the law was. And there's in the Judge Chronicles, I think, they have a bunch of narratives done by the PhDs about attitudes on various things. And they do talk about, in the Exodus section, the relationship between slaves, the racial dynamics, slaves, and then freed slaves. And then post that, those who were born not enslaved. And so they have some information there. And in their Revelation, it's some of the conclusions of what they have learned through their experience doing this. But we have records to look at. And I got to the records. There are 2 ways. One is to go under numbers and go to the counties, and then those 10 counties you can click through at the top of that page. The other one is go up here to the little magnifying glass and do, let's see, Margaret Brannon, and you do have to spell it the way they spell it, and I think I didn't. Yep, I think it was Brannan. And of course, it didn't like that. Come on. And Margaret is M-A-R-G-R-E-T rather than Margaret, like some of us. And in the search results, you get a couple of things. You get a hit on the coroner who is in the thing. In the case, you get by her name. And so you get to see, you can see all the inquests that J.M. James did. And then the state versus whoever it is going to be the case. Because in a court case, you always have to have a plaintiff and a defendant. You always have to have somebody versus somebody. And in this case, it's always going to be the state versus the dead body. There are formulas for this. It's just the way it was done. It feels a little weird, but it's kind of like a probate case where you have half of the heirs facing off with the other half of the heirs, and it is a legal procedure, not that they were really against each other. Now, sometimes they were, but we'll get into that next month. So on the overview page, you get the state versus the dead body of Margaret Brannan. You get the date that it was December 15th, 1889. She was female, white. Natural causes was the category of death. Brain is what they pulled out versus heart condition or heart affliction. And they do say the inquest finding was that she died of heart failure or affliction of the brain. So they could have classified it as either brain or heart, and they classified it as brain. Tells you that the coroner was J.M. James, and the location was at or on Mrs. Alice Taylor's place. So they were reading it the same way I was reading it, that it sounds like it was a rental house on a larger property, or a sharecropper's house or whatever. And then the source. And then you get, again, a copy of the file that starts with Margaret Brannan, 15 December 1889. And if it will load this time, yes, because it didn't want to load earlier. And I'm going to enlarge this if it will let me. On this, you can see the lines in the paper, and I could not see the lines in the paper in the microfilm because the microfilm is in black and white. This may have been done in grayscale. And so this is a whole lot more readable than the prints I have or what the microfilm showed. So you might have some better results if you are looking for the Brannan family to know what was happening. Might have a little better luck with these jurors' names on this. But some of those letters are kind of faded. They were lighter ink. So, and then let's go back, and our other case was oh, come on. Tell me the dude's name. It was on William Davies' house, but that's not how they index it. Hutchison. Okay. Let's see. Yeah. The state versus the dead body of Roland Hutchison. And so we do find that he is a deceased white male. Homicide is the category. Blunt instrument is the classification of the weapon. And that they said it was a shovel. Didn't specify it was a wooden shovel until the inquest finding. But that William Davis did with a large wooden shovel strike the said Roland Hutchison on the head, which did break the skull. So whether there was obvious breakage of the skull or somebody just felt it and, oh yeah, there are multiple pieces there. Don't know. Not sure I'd want to be on that coroner's jury. I just, yeah. And again, you get the pictures of the pages. So that is really cool for them. And when you go to the county listing, you can sort. So you can search by name from the little magnifying glass. On the Spartanburg County page, as an example, you can sort by name, but it is only listed by first name. So just know, if you're looking for Hutchison, you got to do the search bar. You can't sort it by last name. You can only sort it by first name. Hey, Cheryl, your mic's live. And you can sort by date, death type, and death method. So I could search for date, or I could sort by date, and I get Roland Hutchison as the first case. And if I hit it again, I get Margaret Brannon as the last case in this county that they have the records for. You can sort by death type. And a lot of them are unknown death types. But obviously unknown is different from murder. You know, it was unknown. They didn't have the science at the time to figure out why. In infant, it could have been sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS, those types of things. Sometimes stuff happens and we don't have an explanation at the time. You know, somebody was struck by lightning. If we search by death method, maybe we need to search it. We need to hit it again, because that way it'll get us the not blanks. So, okay, somebody died by a whip, a slave died by whip. Couple people were in a wagon accident. I mean, different wagon accidents, not the same wagon accident. A bunch of people got hit by trains. Not unusual in the upstate. We have those still. Stick, small rope, shovel. That was our Roland Hutchison, more rope. So if you want some pretty interesting but somewhat dark reading, this could be an entertaining rabbit hole for a while. Now, I have one more example of a slightly later case, courtesy of Ron Swain, who is here in the room with me. He has a program that will be coming up in the spring, the Historical Association, right? Yep, in February and March. So take a look at Spartanburg County Historical Association for a program by Ron Swain called Murder by Suicide, Part 1 and 2. And part of it involves a relative of his who is not the decedent, but the wife of the decedent, and her adventures and misadventures through all of this. But this case starts on page 23 of a book. It says it's microfilmed. We don't know where it's microfilmed, other than the coroner's office may have this microfilm. But page 23, page 24. So this has been transcribed into a bound court record book. And so we get information about this case, which looks very different from those loose files that we saw earlier. And I'm not going to spoil Ron's story, but I did want to highlight. Now, the person who microfilmed this wasn't as careful, because you see the swerve in the middle of the page. So one would hope that the loose papers still exist. Right now, the only way to get these records that are more recent than what we have on microfilm, 1889, is to go to the coroner's office and ask nicely. Ron was able to do that. I've heard from many other frustrated people who could not get the paperwork out of the coroner's office because it wasn't a current case and they were busy. And so, ask nicely, maybe take them donuts, I don't know. But anyway, but the records do change over time. And as I said, I know coroners' juries were still being convened. They are still legally able to be convened. I just don't know how often that happens these days. So, okay, I was gonna put my contact information up at the end, but I had to close all the way out of that to get to my screen here. So, are there questions either here in the room or online? Okay, I see one. What is the difference between a coroner and a medical examiner? A coroner is an elected office and a medical examiner is a paid medical examiner. So a medical examiner has higher qualifications for medical degree training in forensic science and some things like that. Whereas the coroner, while there are requirements, and the more you get into the modern current era, the requirements have gotten a little stricter for medical background, law enforcement background, et cetera. The medical examiner has more medical experience and certification. Okay, I see. When did South Carolina start keeping coroner's records? It's going to depend on the county within the state. It was probably on the books long before 1803 when our first case is recorded or the records survive here in Spartanburg County, because we were created as a county in 1785 and a lot of our records start by 1787 with the first court really meeting and doing things. Because of the name, does CSI Dixie mean they help with unsolved cases? No, not that I'm aware of. I think they were just going on crime scene investigations. Well, that's what a coroner does. They were the original CSI. And so, yeah, it's not so much unsolved cases as just, hey, here are the records of the cases. Yeah.
On the CSI side, where on your microphone that you have here, when Margaret, it didn't differentiate whether she was white, black, or whatever. But I noticed the CSI had a place for race. You knew it was a white lady.
Yeah, and
Down some of the records that way as well.
yes, and I'm not completely sure where they're getting the racial information, because as I was reading the two cases, I did not see that, but I did not read those cases with an absolute fine-tooth comb. I read them for basic information, so it could very well be in there. And it could be that they supplemented with some additional census research and that kind of thing. Because, yeah, I know with Ron's research on his case that we did a lot of newspaper articles, and we did discover that it was the Charleston News Post and Courier verbatim printed that Inquisition report, the verdict. And so sometimes you get lucky and somebody's already done all the transcription at the time. So this is a first step research, or something that if you find a newspaper article that says, hey, my person was murdered. Well, you go to the next step and you start doing newspaper research. You start doing probate research. You start researching the other people in that case. Did they get convicted and that kind of thing?
Census records as well, kind of get an idea where to start in that county or that area.
Yep. So yeah, start with the various censuses, find out who the neighbors are, those types of things. Let's see, one website that lists when coroner's records started And they're looking particularly 1896 Elmore County, Idaho. I don't know of any websites that have overall information, but I would go to the Family Search Wiki and see if they mention coroner's records for that location, that county in Idaho. You might also do an Ask a Librarian at either the Idaho State Historical Society or the State Library, whichever one handles record storage for the state. I'm not familiar with Idaho in particular, but I know that those records would have been kept. And the further west you go, the better they're at retaining a lot of those records, simply because the records aren't from as long ago. Idaho was only settled in that second half of the 1800s period. So there's a couple hundred years fewer records for them to have to keep up with. I moved here from Kansas, so I can only speak to what Kansas's records are, but Kansas was opened for white settlement in 1851. So their records go back to that period. So, are there other questions? This is good. We've got good questions tonight. I'm happy.
I think that might be it, unless somebody else wants to type one in.
And I do encourage you, if you've got South Carolina people, and especially in the 10 counties that they have completed on CSI Dixie, to at least go explore the site, because there's a lot of good background information there. And again, in your locality, you're going to want to look for where are the state records kept. So they might be at the state archives, they might be at the state historical society or the state library, or they could still be on the local level, and that's going to depend on the state. Because I know in Kansas, it's the state, Kansas Historical Society. In Virginia, it's the Library of Virginia. In South Carolina, it's the Department of Archives and History. So that varies state to state. But you can find all sorts of records on the local level as well. And many of them are just as fascinating and related, such as jail records and other types of records. So thank you for going down the rabbit hole of coroner's records with me tonight. And I hope that you learned something and that you stuck with us. And the recording should be up by the end of the week. So thanks so much, and see you next month for probate and wills and estates. Okay, Cheryl, we can stop recording.